Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Gunn, and I am the coordinator of digital scholarship at Catholic University of America Libraries. This workshop is being recorded and will be made available at a later date along with the slides. Today, Charles Gallagher, our research and instruction librarian at Catholic University, will be presenting on effective methods for evaluating AI generated results. Please leave your questions to the end of the presentation. Take it away, Charles.
Thank you. Hello, and thank you for joining the workshop today. My name is Charles Gallagher, one of the research and instruction librarians at Catholic University of America Libraries. As I'm sure you've heard by now, AI tools have a lot of wonderful capabilities. However, these tools can still make grievous mistakes and require scrutiny from users. Additionally, AI content is prevalent throughout the internet. Almost anything you can find online may have been created by an AI tool. How can we, as AI users and researchers, navigate this new and at times perilous landscape? It turns out that the same evaluation techniques used for other digital resources can apply to AI content as well. I'll cover a few ways that you can confidently evaluate the output of AI resources and assess their accuracy. As you can see, we have quite an ambitious agenda for today. So I'm going to cover a little bit of basics about how AI works, very minimal. I would recommend consulting other sources for more of a technical description, but I at least want to leave everyone with an understanding of what we're talking about when we say AI or generative AI. We're going to also cover some of the limitations of AI. It does a lot of great things, but there are still some areas that it makes mistakes on. We'll talk about why you want to evaluate AI output. Um, we'll also talk about picking out the right AI tool. Not every AI tool can be used for academic research. Some are much better for that option than others, and so picking the right one, there's a criteria you should follow. We'll talk about the SIFT method and lateral reading, as we're talking about how to evaluate these AI tools and how to these AI outputs in ways that you can be sure that the information that you see is accurate by verifying other sources. Then I'll go through a practice where I'll show you some of the steps that I would do if I was using an AI tool to do research on a very simple research project. And then conclude with some final and concluding thoughts, and of course, an opportunity for some questions. So before we go further, I want to cover some basic points about AI. For those unaware, when we discuss AI, we are generally going to be discussing generative AI, especially in this context. Generative AI programs at their most basic level are text prediction models. These text prediction models have been trained through many rounds of trial and error to respond to your query. I'm making it sound a lot more simple than it is. It's very complicated, very intricate stuff. But at their basic level, these programs are about trial and error and providing an answer to your question. These programs are called large language models, and they use these training data sets, which they draw upon to answer your question. Now, the challenge with early LLMs, or large language models, that's their abbreviation, was that they were not only able to draw upon these training data sets, or they only were able to draw upon these training data sets. So any information which is more current would not be included in the LLM's answer. Equally troubling from a librarian perspective was that LLMs were unable to cite and prove where the information they consulted came from. These factors reduce the effectiveness of LLMs significantly as research tools. RAG models help to fix these issues. Retrieval Augmented Generation models, or RAG models for short, allows LLMs to consult outside databases and internet sources to answer a user's query. In doing so, the RAG model also provides citation to what source the information came from. To sum up, RAG models enable LLMs to answer a user's query with up-to-date information and links to cite where the information they consulted came from. So vast improvement over just a simple LLM. Despite the improvements provided by RAG models, limitations remain for AI. First is hallucinations or made-up answers. LLMs are driven by programming design to provide an answer no matter what, even if they don't have an answer for you, and will sometimes make up sources of information that have no basis in reality. An example of an hallucination can be seen in our next slide. In this image, last summer, the Chicago Sun-Times, a newspaper in the Midwest, produced a summer reading list for their readers. Normal thing to do if you're a local publication. The problem? The AI-generated list included titles which do not exist. Of the 15 items listed, only 5 of them are written and published. When I first saw this list or when I was reviewing it for this presentation, I one of the titles jumped out to me, The Last Algorithm by Andy Weir, who of course has written several books that have been turned into movies. But he has not written a book titled The Last Algorithm, at least as of yet. Maybe he'll take inspiration and go from there. Another story that actually I discovered the other day, or just yesterday, was that there is a police department in Utah that was testing AI report software. And so how it works was the program, the body camera that the officer was wearing, records information, and then the AI program makes sense of it and turns that into text. Now, the officer was somewhere where the movie The Princess and the Frog was playing, and so the body camera, when it recorded the dialogue from the movie, the AI system decided that in the report it wrote that the officer was transformed into a frog. So a little bit of a trial and error. That's why you test and experiment with programs and evaluate whether they're effective or not. So clearly AI can make these mistakes and create improper information. The other limitation of AI, or I mean, just another factor of it, is that bad actors or people with nefarious intentions can use AI to create and spread misinformation or disinformation. While AI itself may create information, other users can share inaccurate information, either accidentally or intentionally. In this, we have a couple of examples here. So, for an example, there's a recent rise of fake online newspapers that are filled with AI-generated content and news articles that use the likeness and reputation of well-known news organizations to gain a following or audience. Sometimes the real news organization does not even know this is happening and have to seek out legal redress in order to shut down the fake news sites. At a worst extreme, there are AI tools which can take a picture of a person and generate a nude version or a fake nude of that individual. Public schools have been grappling with cases of students in middle school and high school using these tools to generate fake nudes of their classmates. To be clear, misinformation and disinformation are not new phenomenon. It isn't as though AI just created this problem out of nowhere. However, the challenge is that AI has made the ability to create these deepfake images and videos much easier and quicker. 10 years ago, a deepfake image may have required a sophisticated and expensive computer program that would have to be run by someone who was trained and had experience using these programs, and it would have taken them at least a couple of hours to generate a reasonably good deepfake. Now, an untrained individual can download an app online and generate a deepfake or comparable quality in a matter of minutes. So clearly, the possibility of so why do we want to evaluate AI content? Well, obviously, as we've kind of stated, as I stated, there is the possibility of hallucinations or inaccurate information. So if you're using an AI tool, you want to ensure that whatever you submit, whether you're a student writing a paper or if you're a faculty, a teaching faculty, and you plan on using AI content in the classroom exercise, or if you're planning on using it as a researcher to help you with a journal publication, you want to ensure that the information it provides is accurate and doesn't include false information. But there's other reasons too why you want to evaluate it too, because you also want to determine if the results sufficiently resolve your prompt or reason for doing your searching. So if I'm going into an AI tool, which I will be doing in a few minutes, and I'm doing a research project and I want to get results on and recommended sources for a research topic that I'm interested in, and it doesn't provide all the sources that I need, well, that I need to make sure that that's the case. And if that is the case, then I need to go back and reevaluate and figure out how I can redo my prompt. And also it's an opportunity to look for ways to improve future prompts. So maybe adding a certain detail into the prompt a certain way actually hit the mark and it managed to find everything I need that's accurate and really meets my expectations. So maybe that's something I want to consider for future prompts. So taking that step to step back and say, okay, this worked really well, and I want to incorporate this into future prompts based on these results. A golden rule when using AI, whether you're doing it for research, whether you're doing it for like some personal activity, whether you're doing it to generate an image, always carefully evaluate the results for accuracy. You don't want to look like you have egg on your face because AI research paper or an AI content that you found online said that George Washington crossed the Charles River during in the winter of 1776 for the instead of the crossing the Delaware. So you want to make sure that whatever you're dealing with is accurate and shows that it resolves what you're looking when creating AI content, it's always important to first ask yourself, is this AI tool the correct one for the job? So different AI tools accomplish different tasks. For example, you would not expect an AI image generator to be a good tool for academic research. Choosing a tool that has a research focus is a good first step. The next step is to consider if the AI tool provides outside links to where it retrieved the information. Remember, you want to find an AI tool that has a RAG model, as those tools cite where they pull their information from. If you can't easily identify where the tool has pulled what information it's consulted, this is a sign it's not a good tool to use, especially for like academic research. Cost is another factor that must be considered. A lot of AI tools now require a paid subscription in order to use the tool. There are some AI programs that I won't name right now that also are embedding ads into their product for people who have a lower tier subscription, and that also can impact the quality of the product itself. So, as the user, you have to consider if it's worth your time and money to get a subscription to an AI tool, and how much you want to pay to get a better quality experience. So. And finally, is this a tool that maybe your library or librarians have experience with? Libraries are compiling information on AI tools to better understand how they can be used and what tools work best. Reaching out to a librarian for advice is a good step toward identifying a relevant AI tool. So when you go through the prompting, I won't go into the finer details of prompt engineering. That could be and has been an entirely different workshop. But one element that I do want to emphasize is the review stage of prompt engineering, um, and asking yourself, does the response actually answer your question or your research question? So looking at your what you generated, looking at your prompt, does this actually do what you want it to do? And is the information provided accurate? Or are there details that are wrong or inaccurate? Finer details might be harder to pick out at this stage of the process of your evaluation, but glaring issues should, of course, be identified. So, if an AI tool tells you that the American Revolution began in 1780, well, then that's not right, and you have to go back and reevaluate the prompt to see how you can make it more specific to help guide the AI tool to something that's more relevant. And also asking yourself, could a more specific prompt better address your research question or topic? um, you know, Specifying what type of resources you wanted to consult, telling it a specific time period that you wanted to analyze, like looking at this particular subject areas or subsubjects within the subject that you're interested in researching. These are all ways you can think about, like, maybe I can redo my prompt, maybe I can make it look better. Redoing your prompt is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it becomes necessary to get the results that you need. So we're going to step out of the realm of speaking about how to evaluate AI content that you create specifically. What we'll be talking about will also apply to that, but also talking about how you should engage with AI content that might be on the internet. It's prevalent on the internet, and you should be prepared to effectively evaluate AI results regardless of their source. One method is to consider the SIF method, one methodology. While the SIF method was created to evaluate digital content in general, the methodology can apply to AI content as well. So each of the letters is an acronym, so each of the letters, of course, correspond to a different point. The first is S, stop. Before sharing or using the information, pause. Do not immediately act on the information, such as sharing on social media or taking a political action. Is the source trying to get you to react in some way? So, does the content say, so first it's like a common sense check, does what the content say make sense? Does this track? Does this seem like a basis in reality? I'm sure if you've seen videos on the internet, you've seen plenty of like AI generated videos that are obnoxiously AI. Like there's silly situations of cats with machine guns and dogs running around and doing flips and stuff like that. It's obviously AI generated, but like taking that second to stop and think, wait a minute, could a cat actually operate a machine gun? This might be AI generated. And of course, you want to be even more specific with, text work because text has the same kind of philosophy. Maybe not as obvious, but it's still there. And if you take a second to before reacting or sharing, you can save yourself some embarrassment from having to say, "Sorry, guys, it turns out that was AI generated." The next letter is I. Investigate. Consider the source of the information. Is the author a credible source, and what type of website are you looking for? Look carefully at the output or the content or what the text is. Um, is there information about it, how it was generated, what program generated the AI content, and if it's on like if you're looking at a website, is the author of the website someone who's like an expert on the field or can speak as an authority on whatever the content is? It would stand to reason. It's fairly, I think, logical to think that if somebody who has a subject matter expertise in an area and wants to make sure that whatever they put out in the world is accurate to their standards and their knowledge, if they would want to evaluate the work carefully before sharing it publicly. And the same goes for like looking at the organization maybe who sponsors the website. They also have, if they are experts on the field or they can speak as an authority, they also want to evaluate and can evaluate this content correctly and make sure that everything is accurate. Now, that is not like an ironclad rule. That is not everything's fine. We've identified that it's this professor at Notre Dame and they can talk about what this topic is and they know what they're talking about. That's just one more step in the process of saying, okay, so maybe this is a credible source. Maybe this is AI content is valid. So um, the next one is F, find other sources. So verify the information with reputable sources such as newspapers, books, or reference materials. Um, you know, you basically want to look for outside sources that are not AI generated. Uh, Remember that with some of these AI generated content, they provide links to outside resources that they consulted in order to provide an answer. So following those links, looking at other resources, if there's a reference to page or if the AI content or the website has a reference page, following up those references to verify that the information that the original content says is accurate is also a good step. Finally, trace claims, examine any citation, links, or references supplied by the website. So in this case, follow those links, follow those different references. See if they lead to reputable resources or if the site, or if it's not a reputable source, then that's a sign that maybe this AI content might be wrong. And I have to look for some outside sources, some non-digital sources too, to make sure that I'm only looking at accurate information. Remember, for academic research, you will be looking for peer-reviewed scholarly journal articles as the gold standard. So remember, so random blogs and Wikipedia sites are not going to cut it as a direct source. Now, they might be a good way to use them for, finding additional sources. That's certainly one method you can use. But as a direct source to verify this AI content, not so much. That's not a good strategy. Again, sometimes you are not going to always be able to tell if a website includes AI content. So these steps are a good practice whenever you are searching for digital resources. So even if it's not AI content, these are just some good philosophies to keep in mind. In conjunction with the SIFT method is employing a technique known as lateral reading. Lateral reading is the practice of searching outside sources to verify the accuracy of a piece of information. So following links provided by the AI content to see what the original source says is an example of it. Checking out the website's owners or the about page to see, is this actually a legitimate organization? Is this, just some random person ranting on the internet in blog form? Looking at other electronic sources to help verify the information is another strategy to employ with lateral reading. And, finding out any information about any authors that the content itself references. So if it says, if it says Anna Strong said in this article that X equals Y, so we therefore have to do Z. Looking up the information about Anna Strong, maybe did she actually write this article? Did she actually say this information? Following up that kind of information, taking the content seriously, and following up any links that or any information that it provides. One way to think of lateral reading is that when you're practicing it, you're moving away from the original source, either left or right. and you're looking at other sources to verify and compare to what the original article or content is reporting. So now I'm going to go step out of the PowerPoint presentation and I'm going to do some demonstrations with three AI tools. So Perplexity, ChatGPT, Deep Research, and Scite. So it's a little bit about each of them. Perplexity is a free AI tool that has the option of additional like searching parameters if you pay a subscription. It consults a lot of popular sources. So what we're going to see is that it's going to be pulling links from popular websites and open source websites that it uses to generate an answer. ChatGPT Deep Research, of course, ChatGPT is I think pretty well known. It kind of kicked off the whole generative AI of the last couple of years. They have a more advanced tool now that allows it to do some more deep diving. So it's going to, what's nice about it is it not only shows us where it's pulling its information from, but it also kind of like tells us the thinking process that it goes by. So we can check its like reference strategy and like what kind of research references it's consulting when it's generating this report. It's not perfect, and it's also going to consult popular sources, but we can also see hopefully some more advanced sources consulted as well, so more academic focused sources. And then Scite. So Scite has in its background Semantic Scholar, which is a AI generated database that pulls a lot of open science and open ER journals, open access journals from it. So you can expect it to consult a lot more of academic journal articles. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with Perplexity. So if you haven't gone to Perplexity yet, this is what the landing page is going to look like. You have your little search box here where you can input a query and it'll generate an answer based on your request or what your question is. And there's other features as well. Now, some of these tools take a couple minutes to generate an answer, especially ChatGPT Deep Research. So to ensure that you guys aren't just sitting here watching a screen load for a couple minutes, I've already submitted a query to each of these different tools, and we'll go through them step by step to see, how this is organized and some of the ways I could go about doing a search. So I started with a very basic prompt. Now, if you're interested in learning more about prompt engineering, spoiler alert, this is not a good prompt. This is very basic. If I was going to do better, I would probably like be more specific about the kind of sources I wanted to consult. I would tell about the kind of audience that I'm writing for or doing research for. Telling it, what kind of sources you should look for. So if I want to do a more advanced prompt engineering, I would apply those to that, and that would also probably affect my results. I would probably get stuff that's more aligned with what I maybe am interested in if I define my prompt a little better. But for now, for demonstration purposes, I kept it pretty broad. And so we see here, we have this information down here, and it's saying, okay, so I asked it, explain the geopolitical and political implications of the American Revolution. American Revolution is a topic I particularly enjoy researching. So here we have our interests, our answer. The American Revolution reshaped the balance of power in the Atlantic world, accelerated an age of revolutions, and created a new kind of nation state. And so I see here that at the bottom of the paragraph, it says it's got these four sources consulted. So I can look through and say, okay. So first it looks at a website called the Boston Tea Party Ship. Sounds like an interesting website, but probably not something that's for like a scholarly audience. I can look at USA Scene, US History Scene, which seems to also be another kind of like website. See what else I got here. Oh, okay. So I see that in this, putting this together, Perplexity decided to consult the Smithsonian Magazine. So we have this article here in the Smithsonian Magazine. The American Revolution was just one battlefield in a huge world war, talking about a new exhibit that from 2018. So not new, but at the time was new. Uh, Going up about the American Revolution. So I can go through, I can read and see, okay. The new exhibit focuses on the American Revolution, a world war, demonstrated with new scholarship how the 18th century fight for independence fit into a larger international conflict that involved Great Britain, France, Spain, the Dutch Republic, Jamaica, Gibraltar, and even India. The outcome might have been very different. Talking about an author, maybe that might be another source I could consult. So, I can look through here and read more about the American Revolution. And I'm not going to read the entire article for you because that would be very boring. But so a couple things that I'm looking at this year. Okay. So I see that this is produced by Smithsonian Magazine. Of course, it's associated with the Smithsonian Institution, and I could I could dive down the about page to see who they actually are involved with, make sure that this is the real Smithsonian institution. I believe it is. If I wanted to, I could find out more information about this museum correspondent. Is she actually associated with the museum? I don't know off the top of my head, so I'd have to dig in a little deeper to see if she was at the time that this article was produced. Now, I'm an academic researcher. I'm doing academic research here. So this would not necessarily be a good source for me to use to cite in a paper, right? So I need something that's been peer reviewed, like a journal article or a book that's gone through a peer reviewed publication process, like an academic press. So I'm going to be looking for something that's a bit more aligned with that kind of scholarship. But what's useful about this and what's useful about Perplexity is that it enables me to find that in sources, find that information. Because maybe this book that this person wrote might actually be a really good source for my paper. Maybe that's something I really want to consult. I'm looking for books on the American Revolution, and this one has an international relations view, so maybe that's something I might want to look into more. So by using Perplexity, I'm able to just get some basic information about it and see what other sources are out there. And so I can keep scrolling down. So you can see it's consulting a lot of websites, Wikipedia, this USA History scene. Oops, didn't mean to click on that. But here we have diplomacy in the American Revolution. So Wikipedia, again, not necessarily a reputable source to use as a direct source, citing for purposes. But you can come down here, and if you find a section that's you're interested in, sorry, scrolling a little too fast, and you can go to the bottom and you can look at the reference page. So that can give you some ideas about what references you want to consult and use for later papers. I won't scroll all the way to the bottom because it's a very, very long article. What also is nice about Perplexity is that we can go here to the links, and it will also list out all the different sources that it consulted with links to the outside sites. So, and you can see, it ranges from websites like the American 250th American Enterprise Institute, which is a think tank in DC, to Reddit. So again, you have to be careful about the information that you are looking at, because if you had, say, cited this for an academic paper, and the professor had been able to follow up with it and saw that you're citing a work that cites Reddit as a source, that might not be a very good idea from a academic perspective. So just something to keep in mind. These are great for discovery of identifying other sources, but they're not a good source in and of themselves. Okay, we'll go ahead and go into ChatGPT next. So ChatGPT, their landing screen, if you've noticed, is a little very similar to Perplexity. It's very stark. It's very, very, very basic. So for clarification, with Perplexity, I was using a free access account. With ChatGPT, I'm using what's called their Go account, and their Go account is basically $8 a month, and it gives you access to some of their deep research tools and their AI image generator. Unfortunately, they have ads as part of their AI image generator, so it's not the greatest tool to use for that kind of purpose. But we're going to do what's called deep research. And so you can click here to choose a particular type of filter, or to a particular type of standard, and you could do a deep search through that way, to do that way. Now, again, this one actually takes quite a long time to load properly. So instead of me trying to keep you guys entertained for a couple of minutes, I have already made this one. Already to once again explain the geopolitical and political implications of the American Revolution. And what's interesting about this is that when I did a search this way, is it actually pushed back against my original prompt and said, could you clarify what angle you'd like me to focus on for the geopolitical and political implications of the American Revolution? It wants me to be a bit more specific about my prompt. It's pushing me to be a bit more, tell me to figure out what kind of audience I'm writing for. So it's trying to push back to see, what kind of sources it should consult, what kind of information it should provide. So that's good, because it's basically trying to guide me to a better, more successful prompt without telling me, hey guy, your prompt's not very good, so maybe you think about doing it over again. And of course, I'm just doing the simple one, so I just told it to do it again, and it accepted. And so it generates this paragraphs, these multiple paragraphs for me, this whole page. And so you see that in addition to, giving me the paragraph that it's writing about or wrote about, it also has these links at the end of different sentences and sections telling me where it consulted that information. And you see, it's pulling from a lot of Wikipedia articles. So again, it's consulting a lot of online sources. Oh, look at that. We also are consulting the American Enterprise Institute as well. We can keep on scrolling down here slowly. It's contacting the Australian government. That's interesting. If I go on down here, so I see, oh, what's also interesting is it's also consulting primary sources like the Treaty of Paris from the National Archives. So I can go to the National Archives website directly from the link in the paragraph, and it will provide. It's not consulting the actual document itself or the transcript. It's just talking about the paragraph in information about the Treaty of Paris itself. So the introductory information here. So yeah, but once again, this is also provided by the National Archives, so a bit more of a reputable source than say Wikipedia. So this might be something useful to learn more about the topic. Now, again, I would not necessarily quote this or paraphrase this section in the paper. This would not be necessarily a good source to use. Now, granted, if I'm quoting from the Treaty of Paris of Peace itself, which ended the Revolutionary War, then yeah, that might be a good primary source for me to use for a historical paper. So then instead of having to search for it on Google and hope I can find it eventually, or search in the National Archives, here it is. I can just read the transcript of it and I can put it into my paper, or I can cite it and use it however I need to for my research project. So I can keep going down. So you see a lot of history.com, American Revolution, which is like a if I look on it here, it is a museum about the American Revolution. What's also nice about ChatGPT is that oftentimes it will highlight the section of text where it came from or where it's citing from, so you can get a direct reference to seeing where it's pulling its information from. So that's a good option. And of course, if I'm going to evaluate the source, I would look at the museum itself, learn more about it to verify that it's a reputable source. Now, again, maybe not for academic purposes, but if it does any citation or pulls other references itself to support its point, that's something else I could consult as well. So that is ChatGPT. And what also is nice is that, as should allow me to, I'm going to go back to the top. It should allow me to tell me the research process that it went through when it pulled the results or did before. Oh, well, here are the other. So here's the list of the different sources at the bottom with links to them. So it consulted all these sources or claims to consult these sources. Oh, here we go. So if I look at the activity page, the activity tab here, it'll tell me how it went about doing the search. So if I'm thinking about doing like searching in the library catalog for an article or a book on this topic, I can think about how it did its searching, what process it went through to think about how maybe I can use keywords to find relevant sources, and like thinking about the logical process that it went through might help me with my searching as well. And then I have this full list of the 43 sources that it claims to have searched. And you see a lot of them are like popular sites. There's a few government sites like archives.com.gov, and it says, yeah, so that again, we're getting like kind of a mix of a lot of popular sources here too. So like websites and outside of sources. Every time you do a generation with an AI tool, you're going to see probably different results. So what had been in the past, I believe, was a reference to a JSTOR article is not here. But again, not using it as a direct source, but using it to help you with the discovery process is a way that you can use these AI tools effectively. That we're going to consult Cite. Now, Cite is it's going to consult academic research articles, ones that are open access, because as I said before, it kind of consults an AI-powered database that pulls a lot of open access reads, like especially with a scientific focus. So, Cite looks like this when you first land on the home page here. So you can use the assistant search here to tell it what you want it to search, and have it generate results, and it'll give you a paragraph that'll cite where it's pulling its information from. So once again, I went ahead and put in the research topic. Again, it looked like that the topic was so very broad that the prompt was so broad that the AI tool originally was kind of like rejecting it, like, maybe we need to make this a bit more specific, make this better. We persisted with the simple prompt for for this purposes here. And so you see that after it's given me the prompt, it gives me these paragraphs talking about the topic. And you see that once again, it's going to say, okay, so this is where I pulled this information from when I compiled this report. Now, if I go in here to, so I can see information about the article itself, the journal, the author. I can also see like number of publications citing this work, so how often other works cited this author. And so it also tells me information about how, how the work has been, approached. So it'll tell me the number of supporting citations about this work, number of mentioning citations about this work, and number of contrasting citations about this work. So the way that other authors have cited this work is either very positive and using it to support their own arguments, or saying that this author didn't really know what they're talking about and I'm taking the field in a different direction. So I can, if I want to, I'll go down here to one of the ones that I've seen before. So I see this whole paragraph on the revolution created a new sovereign actor in the Atlantic world. Realist views Realists view abundant raw materials as an important element in national power, and the Americans were rich in resources, even if not yet geographically powerful. So if I click on this here and go here, I'm going to bring up the article page, or the page for this article. And I can see, information about this article, how often it's cited, the number of references in the article itself. And then I also see information about each of the authors too. So if I'm trying to evaluate these authors to see if they're real or not, looking at this page, their author profiles can help me to see who they are. But that being said, we do want to step outside of site to verify this information. And it looks like I can get access to this PDF here. So I can go to view PDF. And once it decides to load, it's going to take me to this the actual PDF here, which is very, very interesting. So I could look through this article, and I could see that the journal is the Energy Research and Science, Social Sciences. So I got access to the article, which is great. Because if I want to read this and look through it to myself to make sure that this is good or a good source to use, awesome. Then I can do that. But maybe I want to verify that this is like a real journal, that it's a real journal that does like has a peer reviewed process to it. And I want to verify these authors are real and that they're really people. So how do I do that? Well, one option you can do is you can look up the journal website and chase it down that way. What I might do instead is I might, instead of having to go, off on my own and try to figure things out, is I will try and go to the library website and look up the journal information and the article. So actually, I will look at the article title itself, so that's better. There we go. That's the article title there. And we'll go here, the CUA library, go to the website here. And we'll go and put the title into our website here and see if we can find a record for this article. Okay, so we have this article here, and we can see it through Elsevier Science Direct. Okay, so I can get access to the article through library resources. The reason I want to do so is that it's going to enable me to go to Science Direct, which should allow me to look up information about the authors. So if I go into Science Direct here, as I am, I can look up the profile for these authors to verify through an outside source. So again, I'm following this lateral reading and I'm going to an outside source to say, hey, is this a real person? Do they actually are they actually like professors at this place, or is this like made up information? And I can go to here where I can view their record in a database that we have through called Scopus. Now, so when you're going into Scopus, Scopus is like it's a reputable database that has information about authors and how often they cite, different areas and works that they've published. So I can say, okay, so this author has written, he's 507 citations. He's written 22 documents, and I can find out information about what institutions he's associated with. Which, if you remember from our original prompt, was the sorry, going on the wrong side here, was the publication information was the article itself. So Queen Belfast University. So kind of going through those steps now. Of course, with my demonstrations, it's been pretty straightforward. And you may be thinking, this seems like it takes a lot of time to evaluate these sources. And the answer is yes. These sources take a long time to evaluate. The way to think about how you can use AI effectively for academic research is not that it's going to be a time saving measure in the context that I can just put in a prompt and I'll get everything I need and it'll be perfect. It's more of like it's a quality thing. So you're able to search out more sources, search out more information, and able to find those sources that maybe traditional keyword searching just do not bring up or do not bring back. So don't look at AI as a shortcut. Look at it as an opportunity or another path that you can travel in order to find useful and relevant sources. Go ahead and go into some final thoughts here. AI has the potential to be a great tool to use. However, careful evaluation is still necessary to ensure information is accurate. Failure to accurately evaluate AI outputs or AI powered content can result in consequences ranging from embarrassment to job loss. Just the other day, there was a meteorologist who used to be on some of the local televisions, and then now he's just kind of has a website that he updates from time to time about different weather events. And he had sent out a table that was AI generated. And it turned out the next day he had to retract the table and apologize because the table the numbers were wrong in the table. So bit of a mea culpa, and he had to publicly embarrass himself a bit by admitting that it was wrong. And there are other extremes, right? Where I've heard stories of lawyers who have used AI tools to generate case law, never evaluated the case law properly, and they end up losing their jobs because they went to court with case law that just doesn't exist. It never happened, so it has no basis in reality. And finally, if you're unsure about AI resources, always consult your CUA librarians. Myself and Kevin, we are here to help and to help answer questions as best we can about AI tools. While we are not, we don't know everything about AI and AI tools, we certainly have, we worked with some of them quite a bit. And also, we have an interest in learning more. So if there's something we're not sure about ourselves, we're happy to consult what we know and try to address what your question is. So here are my references. And the slides will be sent out at a later date, so you can certainly click through the links for that later. And here's some suggested readings. So Aaron Tay is a librarian in Singapore. He's written a lot about AI and AI research and how it affects academic research. There is the Ithaca S&R Generative AI Product Tracker, which is a kind of a organization that kind of tracks different new AI tools that do just not beyond just like academic research, but also like image creators, like educational tool generators. So if you're looking for some information about a wide range of AI tools, that's one site you can consult. And of course, the Catholic University of America, we libraries, we have a research guide called Generative AI and Research. So that also has like recommended tools and ways you can use these AI tools effectively. Are there any questions?
All right. Thank you very much, Charles. I don't think there aren't any questions, so we will leave it at that. Thank you again for presenting today. And thank you everyone for coming out. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.